Hello Exiles, and welcome to my Path of Exile Bootcamp Series, where we are going through everything that is PoE 1 related. Now, whether you are a returning player, a new player, or maybe you just want to see what Path of Exile is like, then this guide series is for you. And on today's video, we're going to be going through every single league mechanic that is within Path of Exile. Now, I am not going to talk about how you can add these mechanics into your maps, as that will be for a later video where we're going to be talking about how to juice your maps and how to influence them with the Atlas tree. This is merely going to be a breakdown of how the mechanic works, what you need to do within the mechanic, and then what type of things that it will then drop that are literally specific to that mechanic. Every mechanic will only get 2 minutes, and there will be a timer on screen, so you will be able to see that I am not going to go over that 2 minutes, and then after that we will then move on to the next mechanic. Now, there will be timestamps all the way through this video, so if you do want to just check out certain mechanics and learn about those, then check the description out, because all of the timestamps are going to be there. If you want to learn about every single mechanic that is within Path of Exile 1, then sit down, get comfy, get your popcorn, and let's get cracking. Now, before we jump into the content, I just want to say thank you for everyone that has subscribed to my channel over the last couple of months, and if you have not subscribed and you've just found the channel, then by all means throw me some support if you are enjoying these videos, or this bootcamp guide series if it has helped you, or maybe it's helped somebody else. By all means, throw me a subscribe and it would be greatly appreciated. With that being said, let's jump into this video. So, are we ready, guys? Are we ready? Let's start the clock, timer on the screen, mechanic on the screen, and let's go. So Rogue Exiles was one of the first mechanics ever added to Path of Exile in 0.11. Now, basically, there are several exiles back in the world of Rayclass that actually went wild and went rogue, causing them to actually turn against their own kind. In maps and in other areas, they are unique monsters that can be found randomly throughout instances in Rayclass, and they can start beginning to appear as early as the Axe. Now, some are rarer than others, and they have a minimum level requirement for some of them. Currently, there is 34 different types of Rogue Exiles, and on death they will drop a large amount of items which can then be influenced, and they will drop at least one item for every single inventory slot. Now, they will use a range of player skills to a very deadly effect, which can make them very dangerous, and they will also sometimes showcase a number of purchasable microtransactions which you can actually buy in the shop. Now, if you encounter one within your maps, it might not be so dangerous, but if you encounter multiple, and I'm talking 3, 4, and if not 5, 6, and if you actually manage to boost them and make them gigantic exiles, then it will be a very rippy and dangerous map, so just take care. Vaal. Now, Vaal is not exactly a mechanic, but it is technically within your maps. So when you do maps and you do some areas through the Axe, you will encounter Vaal side areas, and these are areas that will have additional mods that will make the area more difficult. Now, once you have traversed through the zone and you get near to the end, you will then come up against a unique monster. Once you have killed that unique monster, you will then be able to open the Vaal vessel, which has a guaranteed drop chance of at least one Vaal skill gem. Now, Vaal skill gems are an enhanced version of the original skill gem. So for example, if you was to do, let's say, Vaal Righteous Fire, the ring obviously increases and it does more spell damage. So obviously it does do more, but it does come at a cost, and that is that it will actually cost souls, and souls are gained by killing monsters. Now, the other thing that is contained within the Vaal is Aziri. She is a pinnacle boss, but I'm not going to go into fully into detail into this. I'm just going to mention that she is one of the bosses, but we are going to be going through that in a later video when we do talk about mapping and pinnacle bosses. So Strongboxes are a type of chest that are found throughout Rayclass. When they are opened, they will release a series of monsters that you will then need to kill, and they will completely surround you. Once they are slain, they will then drop all of their loot, and obviously the monsters that are dropped will also give you XP and drop a series of loot as well. Currently, there is 12 different types of Strongboxes, ranging from currency to weapons to unique items to divination cards to jewelry. Strongboxes come in 4 different forms: a white Strongbox, which would be just a regular normal one, a magic one, which is blue, a rare one, which is obviously yellow, and then you can then have a unique Strongbox, which can then have special properties, special rarity, special quantity, and it may do certain things where it will release only certain monsters. You can modify the Strongboxes with engineering orbs, alchemy orbs, transmutation orbs, alteration orbs, chaos orbs, Vaal orbs, and orbs of chance to make them better and more juicier. This is a very fun mechanic and is very engaging, and it can be very rewarding. Now, the next one is Beyond. Now, Beyond demons are a type of monster that will spawn during Beyond encounters. Now, unlike most other forms of content, like extra content like what we're going through, Beyond monsters do not have a base chance to spawn in maps. You have to force it in either with a map mod with your Atlas passive skill tree or by using scarabs. Now, when a monster is killed in a Beyond enabled instance, there is a 15% chance that a little small red orb will appear on the ground. If 4 of these appear very close to each other, then portals will open, spawning Beyond demons. Now, when a substantial number of Beyond demons have actually spawned within an instance, each pack spawned grants a stacking chance for each pack to be replaced by a boss. Now, only one Beyond boss can actually spawn per map. However, once a map boss has spawned, no more Beyond portals are allowed to appear unless you have the option on your Atlas skill tree which can actually stop Beyond monsters and the bosses from actually spawning. Now, there are 3 different factions of the Beyond monsters. They are the Pale Scourge, the Flesh Scourge, and the Demonic Scourge, and all 3 of them are connected to a particular Beyond boss. So the Pale Scourge, the boss is the name Idat, the Archangel of Death. For the Flesh Scourge, it would be Gore, the Grasping Maw, and for Demonic Scourge, it would be Katash, the Hate Shepherd. Now, it's worth mentioning that all of the Beyond monsters and the Beyond bosses have a chance to drop tainted currencies, that is tainted scraps, Blacksmith Whetstones, Chaos Orbs, Chromatics Orbs, Divine Teardrops, Exalted Orbs, Jeweler's Orbs, Mythic Orbs, and Orbs of Fusing, all of which are all tainted. If you're wondering what tainted means, it means that you are allowed to use them on corrupted items, and then there are certain elements that you can actually potentially reforge an item and turn it into something completely different, or it may just completely destroy the item. And the next mechanic is Tormented Spirits, or commonly referred to as Torment, is basically a bunch of spirits and ghosts that will appear within your maps or within your zones, and they will flee and run away once you encounter them. They will then potentially possess nearby monsters or touch them to possess them and give them extra powers, but what that will do is that will increase and improve their item drop rates. Now, what it can also do is it can actually possess a rare mob or a unique monster, and any monster that is then bestowed or possessed by a spirit will then gain a modifier, i.e. a touch or a grip based on the spirit that has then touched them. What that will then do is it will then increase the item quantity and the item rarity for every single touch modifier by 25%, and if it is a grip modifier, then the item rarity is increased by a further 50%. Now, there is a series of grip modifiers. There's over 20 odd grip modifiers, but what I will say is that they are very, very dangerous. If you see any rare monsters that has green text as a modifier on their name, you want to try and handle them with care. There are some ridiculous modifiers that you can get on these monsters, ranging from physical damage as extra fire damage, all damage will be chaos damage, they'll have all damage will be leeched as life, they will have increased global physical damage and increased attack speed, they have a 25% chance to shock, they have increased movement speed, they will steal your frenzy endurance charges, and another one they can have 125% increased area of effect. These are not to be trifled with, and if you come across any rares that are possessed within your maps, you do want to take care. Now, if you have a very strong build and can actually destroy these, then this is a very good mechanic to actually farm, where you can actually get the actual ghosts and the spirits to actually run around and actually possess a ton of rare monsters, and then you go around and kill them all, and you will get a full map load of loot, which will be full because of all of the grips that have been added to all of the monsters and all of the rare monsters. And the next mechanic is Essence. Now, essences are primarily obtained from essence monoliths that contain monsters that are usually trapped within crystals, which then can be released by clicking on them 3 times. Now, monsters trapped in essences can occasionally be encountered in most areas, and clicking on them will then break the crystals and free the trapped monsters. Items that can be obtained by killing the trapped rare monsters, which is also enhanced by the actual modifiers, and each essence trapping a monster also grants toughness, and it reduces the amount of damage that it takes. Now, some types of essences only exist in higher tiers, and this is obviously a form of progression. As you are going through the tiers of maps, there are a series of essences which is on screen now. There is obviously the whispering, muttering, weeping, wailing, screaming, shrieking, and then the highest of them all is deafening. Now, there are some special essences which can only be obtained by actually corrupting special essences, and they are the ones on screen now, which are Insanity, Horror, Delirium and Hysteria. All of these essences are a way of crafting, and they can all be used on pieces of items and pieces of gear to be able to craft, and every single essence will tell you what it will provide you with in terms of what type of reward and what type of modifiers on an item. Some will range from attack speed, spell damage, to chaos damage, to physical damage, to nearly every single type of mod that you can think of, and then some of the special ones have got some extra special ones where you can actually do extra damage over time, +2 to the level of aura gems, cannot be poisoned, onslaught, and many other different mods. What I will advise though is if you are going to do any essence farming strategies, just make sure that you do bear in mind that the more essences that they have, the stronger and more deadlier that they are. So if you are wanting to take on some ridiculous essences, as I have shown on screen here, then good luck, and you may need a very strong build to be able to take them out. Breach is next. And for breaches, they will randomly spawn in areas, and they can be easily identified by a hand-like construct within a little circle. Now, once you activate the breach, it will expand and the circle outwards, and it will spawn a mix of breach monsters within the circle. Now, the faster the monsters are killed, the faster the circle will expand. Now, after a while, the expansion of the breach will slow down until it eventually retracts and closes. Now, breaches will stay open for a minimum of at least 30 seconds, and it can be increased to a maximum of 60 seconds based on how quickly the breach monsters are all killed. Now, normal breach monsters killed whilst in a breach do not increase the active time. However, monsters moving outside of the active radius will despawn after a short delay. Now, during this time, it is possible to attack, and you can obviously collect from these monsters splinters and breach rings. Now, the splinters can be combined to make breach stones, and breach stones can then be used to take you to fight a breach lord. Now, there is 5 breach lords in total. There is Zoth, Hull, Esh, Ulnital, and Ayula. Now, they all do different things, and they all drop different items. So Zoth does fire, Tull is cold, Esh is lightning, Ulnital is physical, and Chayula is all chaos. Now, one of the items that the breach lords can drop is a blessing of their particular name, i.e. like a blessing of Tull or Zoth, and what that will do is you can then literally click that onto one of your existing breach stones, and it will then turn it into a flawless breach stone. This will then yield more items and more experience, but it will be harder to complete. Also, the breach rings that can be dropped within a breach, the effects of that breach ring, if you wear any, will be doubled whilst you are inside a breach, which is different to how it acts within Path of Exile 2 for anyone who has played it. Harbingers is next, and these types of monsters cannot be harmed directly. Harbingers will summon enemies to fight you while empowering them in completely different ways. Now, they can only be harmed by killing their minions, and the main thing that they do drop is currency shards. They don't drop main currency items, they will just drop the shards. They also have their own exclusive currency, which is for the fracturing shards. Now, Harbingers are completely invulnerable, so the only thing that you can do is attack the enemies that obviously he will spawn. Now, these monsters will summon in waves and waves and waves until the Harbinger eventually dies, and these Harbingers can use a series of skills like proximity shields, convocation, to teleport their minions around, and some of them can actually use flame dash, ball lightning, and various other skills. The main thing that they do drop is currency shards, and that is everything from an alchemy shard all the way up to a mirror shard, which is obviously the most expensive. Now, if you like Harbingers, you can actually run a particular map that is called a Harbinger map that will literally just be full of Harbingers. It's called the Beachhead map. Now, there is 2 different versions of this. There is the regular Beachhead and there is an infused Beachhead. The infused map has many more Harbingers. However, it is a little bit harder in terms of the damage that they do. Also, the items that drop are a little bit higher, and you can sometimes get some items that can be combined, like the first piece, second piece, third piece of the arcane or time or directions, and what they will do is they will combine into one item which is unique to that Harbinger. And their main currency is a fracturing shard, which combined, once you have 20 of them, will then make a fracturing orb, which will then fracture a random modifier onto any rare item, but it has to have at least 4 modifiers, locking it in place. That is something that a lot of people do when they are in their crafting process, and fracturing is usually the first step of the process to try and get the fracture on the item, and then once that is successful, they will then move on and do all of the other crafting steps. Abyss is next. Now, this league introduces cracks and pits in the earth that will then crack open and spawn monsters when they are approached. Can drop abyss jewels and different special types of jewels that will have new mods on them that can then be equipped in the new generic skill tree, or they can actually be put in gear with abyss abyssal sockets, which is only found in Abyss mechanics. Now there are 4 abyssal jewels: Ghastly, Hypnotic, Murderous and Searching, and 9 times out of 10 people will then socket them either in their skill tree or into a Stygian Vise belt. There is also a series of other drops which can be dropped from the bosses that are within Abyss, and they are all found within the abyssal depths, and they can all socket abyssal jewels inside of the gear. Now when you go down into abyssal depths, which is a low chance of it actually appearing, then you will go down and you will fight one of 2 bosses. You will either find Ulaman, who is the sovereign of the well, or you will find Amanamu, who will basically spawn a series of stationary Stygian hearts and a series of monsters and other items within the screen to try and kill you. Both of these bosses will then drop items which will then be able to provide you with either abyssal jewels or abyssal gear. Now there is a 3rd abyss boss, but that is going to be mentioned when we go through Delve. And the next one is Bestiary, where you're introduced to Einhar, who taught the player how to capture beasts, and within the actual league you had to actually capture them with nets. Now Einhar does it automatically for you now. He will then capture beasts and they are then marked and placed in your menagerie. Now more importantly, these beasts are then used for beast crafting to be able to create, modify or add various types of mods to items. You can also challenge them to be able to get further mods through beast crafting. There are 4 endgame encounters as well that were added in Bestiary League, and they are the spirit beasts. Those 4 are Krakian, First of the Deep, Farrell, First of the Plains, Fenumus, First of the Night, and Sakwal, First of the Sky. And all 4 of these will drop a unique piece of armor, and there are 4 to collect for every single one of them. Now whilst you are encountering these in your maps, you will encounter yellow icons and red icons. The yellow icons means that they are a rare beast, but obviously they are just a regular rare. When you see a red beast, it means that they are more difficult and they are severely more mods that will make them a hell of a lot harder and tankier, and they will take less damage. Now there is a series of metacrafting mods on some of these beasts, and the most expensive one come in the form of a memory. Now we will be going through the beast memory when we go through the mapping video at a later date, but there are some very expensive beasts that can drop from this memory. You can also trade and craft with these beasts. You can go on the trade site and you can buy them, or you can actually check your own and sell them. The way that you would do this is you would buy Bestiary orbs from Einhar, and you can then literally click on any of the beasts within your menagerie and you can then encapsulate them within an orb and then sell that orb to anyone on the trade site. The best website to be able to check the best prices and the best ones that are running on the trade site as of right now is if you go into poe.re. I will put the link in the description below. Then that will actually provide you with all of the prices and the best beasts at the moment. You will then be able to search for these using the regex code in your menagerie. And the next one is Incursion. Now in this league, players would run across Alva Valai, who would create an incursion that would take the player back 2,000 years to the Temple of Atzoatl. While you're in that incursion, the player can then open passages, kill artifacts to change or upgrade particular rooms, which affects the temple's layout in the future. Now after you have completed 11 incursions, the temple in the present day can then be raided for loot and special altars which can then modify items. Now there are particular items that can drop within the temple, and they can then be upgraded by using a vial. Now there are multiple vials to be collected, and they will then upgrade particular items into a more upgraded version that will then do more damage. It also has its own series of unique items that it will drop as well, and one of which is dropped from the actual boss. The main thing that people use this for is for using double corrupts, whether you want to double corrupt your gear or whether you want to double corrupt your gems, which gives you the chance to be able to get a level 21 gem with quality, and you can actually get double corrupt on your gear, but there is a chance that the item may completely poof and vanish from the game entirely. You can be quite lucrative if you do hit something big, but it is a massive gamble and it is a massive risk because you could potentially brick your item. And the next league is Delve. This is an infinite scaling dungeon that is called the Azurite Mine. Now when I say it's infinite, it's not exactly infinite. There is a limit. That limit is 65,535, which a member of the community called Shitsay saying Steve literally hit in Necropolis League for the first time. He is actually going to be on his way to hit it again in the current Settlers League, but I'm not too sure whether he's going to be able to make it. Within this mechanic, you will find deposits of Voltaxic Sulfite in a zone which Nico the Mad will collect to power his crawler, which is used to guide the player through Delve through the deadly darkness. Now, each Delve contains items or azurite which can be used to upgrade your equipment. Delve has special biomes, boss encounters, socketable currency, and many fossils which can be put into resonators for powerful crafting. Additionally to that, it has its own loot pool where there is certain items that will drop from the bosses that are within Delve. There are 3 bosses in Delve. They are Uhutali the Blind, who is found in the Vaal outpost, Kurgol the Black-Budded, who is in the Abyssal City, so he is the 3rd Abyss boss, and finally Ul the Crystal King, who is always found in the Primeval Ruins. Now, all 3 of these drop certain items that can be created to make powerful charge rings centered around frenzy, power, and endurance charges. Also, the deeper that you go in Delve, the monster scaling, damage, and life goes through the roof to the point where it is sometimes completely unmanageable if you don't build in a specific way. But as they say, the deeper you go, the more loot you get. The fossils at a certain depth start to get unbelievably common, and before you know it, you will be swimming in fossils. There is 6 main biomes that you can navigate through, and each one of these will drop certain different fossils. To be able to survive within the Delve, you do need to collect azurite, which you then use to then power up your Voltaxic generator back in base. And the next league is Betrayal. Now, in this league, you will assist Jun on her mission to try and uncover and take down a mysterious group of people known as the Immortal Syndicate. Now, players will encounter a syndicate member in your zones or your maps, along with their allies or enemies. Now, once defeated, the member can either be interrogated, killed, bribed, coerced to betray the other members of the factions. Now, this process helps gather intelligence on your syndicate, and the ultimate goal is to sabotaging its divisions and defeating the syndicate leader. Now, different rewards can be obtained based on who is placed in charge of a particular division, and there is ranks of members and connections between other members, and syndicate members will drop veiled items which contain a mystery affix that then be converted into one of 3 different modifiers, which you will then learn permanently on your crafting bench. Now, all of these affix items can then be gained as crafting options, which you can then be using on future gear. As soon as you get enough intelligence is gathered, you will then be able to raid a syndicate safe house for all of its valuable loot. Just be warned though, sometimes the raiders and the main ranking official of that area may bring on a few of his allies to try and kill you. There is a Betrayal cheat sheet which I will put on screen, and I will put a link in the description below, but it is a very complex mechanic, and it does sometimes mean that you will need to do a bit of research, because I have seen videos on YouTube that have a basic understanding of Betrayal and they're nearly 30 to 45 minutes long. So it is a very complex mechanic, and I would not get into it unless you want to get fully deep into it, but it can be quite rewarding if you put the right factions in the right areas. The main item that people want to farm is when you kill Katarina, who is the main syndicate boss, there is a chance that she will then drop a Veiled Orb. A Veiled Orb can be very expensive because the drop chance is very low. Now, Synthesis League is next. Now, within Synthesis League, when it was originally came out, there was a whole section where you would obviously have fragments of memories, and obviously you would then enter into subzones of memories, and there was this massive map of fractured maps and synthesizing maps and all this good stuff. However, since they've obviously imported that into the main league, that has all now been removed. So what you now have is literally just the unique maps that are now left within the game, and those 4 unique maps are Altered Distant Memory, Augmented Distant Memory, Rewritten Distant Memory, and Twisted Distant Memory. And then finally there is the Cortex, which is the final boss, which is a pinnacle boss, which obviously in there he can drop some good stuff, and his loot pool can drop some very valuable items, one of which is the Bottled Faith Flask. Now, if you run the Uber version of Synthesis, then there is a potential chance of getting triple synth rolls on items. They will drop from the final boss. Now, if you do get lucky and you manage to drop an item that has +1 to power charge, that can be worth upwards of nearly 200 to 300 divines just for one item. So it can be very lucrative, and the actual XP in these maps is very, very good, and the drops are also very, very mixed. You can have anything from currency items to splinters to actual quality items for maps and quality items just in general. So it is a very fun mechanic mechanic to run, and I do enjoy running this one. Within each of those 4 areas, of those 4 unique maps that I mentioned, other than Cortex, there is their own individual bosses as well that you will then need to fight, and at the end of them they could potentially then drop certain rings, and they are unique rings that can be dropped for just that particular boss, which is a circle of anguish, fear, guilt, nostalgia and regret. And next we have Legion. Now in this league, players would find a monolith, a big purple monolith, and when it reached, it would then reveal a battle between legions frozen in time. Now damaging these enemies while they're in status will free them when the time resumes, so it is a timed experience where they can be fought and then killed for loot. Now Legion enemies can drop splinters that will then form an emblem, and once you run 4 of these emblems you can then do a 4-way, and if you have 5 of them you can then run a 5-way. Now that will take you to the domain of timeless conflict, which will then create more loot and will actually drop some specific Legion items that are connected to it, one of which is called incubators, and the second one and the most major one is timeless jewels. Now there is currently 5 timeless jewels that can drop, and they are the brutal restraint, elegant hubris, glorious vanity, lethal pride and militant faith. All 5 of them are build defining jewels that you can put in your passive skill tree, which will then potentially convert keystones, change notables and completely change the dynamics of your build. The other item is an incubator. Now incubators, you can right click and click on any piece of gear, and then an item will drop based on which incubator you select on how many monsters it requires to drop that specific item. So if it requires 6,000 monster kills, then once you kill 6,000 monsters, it will then drop that specific item. Finally, 5-ways are one of the top 3 ways of getting XP. So if you are wanting to gain any fast XP, then 5-ways are the best way to do it if you are able to find a carry on any form of carrying service. Now the next one is Blight, and this is one of my favorites. Now in this league, the world was infested with Blight, and Sister Cassia tasks you with defending her pump as it destroys the Blight's fungal growths. However, once it's agitated, the growths spawn roots that then summon waves and waves of monsters to defend it, and these monsters will then slowly path along a path towards the roots, only to stop to attack whatever is in its path, but are unusually tough. Now to assist with defending the pump, you can then summon towers near the paths to attack and hinder the monsters. There are many different towers that you can put down, whether it be fire, ice or lightning, or whether you just want to pummel them into oblivion, then that will help you. It is basically just a tower defense game within Path of Exile. Now the main reason why people run Blight is for the oils. Now as it is in PoE 2, we currently use emotions to be able to anoint notables onto our amulets. However, in Path of Exile 1, this is where you would use your oils. So every single oil is specific to a particular type of notable. So if you need to put a notable, then you will potentially need a teal oil, a violet oil and a clear oil. You would then take them to Sister Cassia and she would then anoint your amulet. However, within Path of Exile 1, you can also anoint your blighted maps. So you can actually encounter blight within your maps, and you may have a chance of dropping a blighted map. Basically, that is just one massive tower defense where you would have 20 lanes which you have to defend, which can be very, very tough, but once you get to the end of it, you will then have nearly over 100 chests to potentially open, because every single chest will have 5 and you will have 20 lanes to be able to open. As well as the pump dropping a ton of loot, this is a very fun mechanic and I do love this mechanic. A lot of people like running it as well because it does have a nice mixed variety of items that can drop, everything from essence to fossils to currency to divination cards. Everything can drop within this league mechanic, and that is one of the reasons why I do love to play it. And the next one is Delirium. Now in this league, each area would contain a mirror of Delirium. Now when you pass through the mirror, it would then create a fog of Delirium that would then spawn new enemies and make the existing enemies tougher. Now the fog will continue to spread out, and the deeper that the players ventured out, the stronger the enemies would get. Now defeating enemies in the fog would also add extra reward, and any enemies that are within the Delirium can also drop what's called Delirium orbs. They will then add a Delirium to the entire map, and splinters that obviously drop as well would combine to create a gateway to a simulacrum. Enemies in Delirium could also drop cluster jewels, which can be socketed into the outermost sockets in your passive skill tree to create an entire cluster of passive skills. Now the main two enemies that are in Delirium and in simulacrums are Omniphobia and Kosis. Now in a simulacrum there is 15 waves of monsters, and they will continually get harder and harder and harder until the 15th wave, which is then the most hardest. Now there is one particular item which is probably one of the the rarest drops within a simulacrum, which can only drop from Kosis, I believe, or from Omniphobia, and that is 1 passive voices, and that is usually one of the most expensive items in the game when it does eventually drop for the first couple of weeks. If you add any Delirium orbs to your map, then it will add that piece of reward to every single map. Now that is different to how it works in Path of Exile 2, where you would only get a certain rarity or a little bit of extra quantity or maybe pack size. With Path of Exile 1, the Delirium orbs, you can actually pick which rewards you would like to see, and you can mix and match many different Delirium orbs together. The hardest cunt on them all is running 100% Delirious maps on an 8 modded map, but you would need to have a very strong build to be able to deal with that. And the next one is Harvest. Now in Harvest League, we would have to do caches of seeds, we had to have fun with exchanges, we had life force, we had powers, we had all sorts of crazy Excel spreadsheets going on. Yeah, it was quite funky. Once they had actually fine-tuned it and put it into the game, then it was a little bit more vivid and a little bit more clearer to understand. What they did was you now have patches of seeds within the grove that a Sharby is looking after. You then have to literally just click on the seeds that you want to obviously activate. That will then spawn a series of monsters, and they can then either drop primal, vivid or wild life force. This life force can then be used in the Hortocrafty station for certain types of crafts. Now there are sometimes some unique monsters that can sometimes appear within your grove, but you just have to be careful because they can be quite strong and very rippy. They will drop, however, a absolute metric ton of juice, which will help you. You can either use the juice or you can trade the juice away for currency. And finally, you can actually fight Oshabi. She is one of the bosses that you can do. If you actually manage to fight one of the unique bosses and they manage to drop a Sacred Blossom, then you would be able to fight Oshabi, who was the then pinnacle boss for the Harvest League. She has a series of unique drops that can drop, and some of them are very powerful. One of them is a Flicker Strike helmet, which is one of the most important and most valuable helmets for the Flicker Strike build. Now the next league is Heist. Now I'm not a particular fan of Heist, but I know that it is very, very, very lucrative if you do actually get into it. I just don't like waiting for doors to open. But within this league, you are basically organizing heists to infiltrate and steal from fortified caches of valuables. After finding any rogue markers, the player can then use that to visit the rogue harbor and run contracts from the rogue guild that's known as the Ring. Now the player is tasked to infiltrate an area containing valuable items with the help of a rogue for hire, and there are multiple rogues that will help you try and traverse through the actual contracts. They must then try and secure the item and take as many of the valuables as possible before lockdown occurs, and then they have to try and make their escape through a horde of guards alive. If you do not make it out of there alive, then you actually lose all of the items. Similar contracts can then lead into blueprints, which are then used to plant more elaborate grand heists for even bigger payouts and even more loot and exclusive rewards. Players can also equip trinkets that will then train and gear up their rogues to improve the heisting experience as well, and there are certain heist rewards that are specific to heist, like replica items and certain modded items that, such as the Simplex Amulet, which is probably one of the most expensive rare bases that can drop within Heist. Now the next one is Ritual. Now for anyone who plays Path of Exile 2, you should be fully aware how to play this, but if you don't, then let's run through it. So in Ritual League, a ritual altar can be found in each zone that you do if you're able to put it into maps, and interacting with the altar will enclose the player into a ritual circle, and they must then fight a wave of monsters. Now rituals will award tribute, which can then be exchanged for items, including exclusive item bases. Now the favor that you will get for killing monsters can then be used to buy items, currency, divination card, and you can then re-roll the tribute window to obviously as many times as you want until you run out of favor. Omens can be found within rituals, as well as certain bases that are only droppable within ritual. There is also a invitation for the King of the Mists, which is the boss for ritual, which you can then fight, and he has his own dual drops, which obviously an item drops that can be specific to King of the Mists. And finally, you can also obtain splinters and fill blood-filled vessels. So basically you would put an empty blood-filled vessel into your map device, and any monsters that you kill within rituals are then contained within that blood-filled ritual vessel, and you can then put that into your next map, and it will then double if not triple the amount of monsters that you will get in your maps, which will then increase the amount of favor that you will then get in all future maps that you then use them in, to basically try and see if you can re-roll as many items as you can or get the best rewards out of your ritual favor window. And the next one is Ultimatum. Now for anyone who's come from Path of Exile 2, it is slightly different to how you've experienced within Path of Exile 2 with the Trial of Chaos. Within Path of Exile 1, this is a Vaal themed trial master, and what he will do is he will then offer you a Trial of Chaos where you must battle against waves of monsters in an enclosed area with dangerous modifiers added to earn your rewards. Now with each successful win, you can either claim your prize or start a new wave with an additional modifier added for it to provide you with bigger and better rewards, but it makes it so much harder. Now if you lose, all of the rewards that you have accumulated are then lost. The main currency that is obtained from Ultimatum is catalysts, which you can then use to then add quality to your jewelry, so your rings, your amulets and your belt, and you can drop inscribed ultimatums, which can basically be one massive ultimatum room where you have to sacrifice something, and if you manage to complete the actual ordeal, you are able to duplicate whatever it is that it is asking you to sacrifice, and you are able to potentially fight the Trial Master on the 10th wave of a ultimatum if you are lucky, and he then has a specific unique drop pool which can be quite lucrative, and you can actually fight him and kill him. And the next one is Expedition. Now within Expedition you will encounter bomb sites where you are there to excavate the Rayclass Kalguran's lost ancestors' settlements. Now you will use explosives to actually blow up the site and unearth monsters, and those monsters can then drop artifacts and rewards. Now there are remnants that would also be in the map. Those remnants will obviously increase the risk, but they will also increase the drops for that particular zone. Just be careful with the remnants though, because some of them can make the monsters completely immune to all elemental damage or chaos and fizz, so just be careful. Also it's worth noting that every single bomb that blows up, every single monster is then going to be covered by that remnant, and the last bomb that will go off will then have every single remnant on top of it. Now if you are using the one bomb technique, then every single monster will have every single modifier on it, so just take care. Now the main drops that can drop are artifacts. You can get Broken Circle artifacts, which you can be used with Gwenin to gamble either unique items or rare items. You can get Black Scythe artifacts, which you can use to haggle with Tujan to buy currency and many other things with him. Just don't push him down too far in haggling or he will just keep the item. There are then Order artifacts that can be used with Rog, which can then be used for crafting. Now they always say Rog is Pog, and that is because his crafting techniques are very, very strong. There are then Sun artifacts, and you can use these with Danning. He will then sell you every single type of artifact for all of the factions, with the occasional reroll currency and the occasional logbook. Now logbooks are like one massive bomb site, similar to how a blighted map works. There are no monsters in the map when you enter it, but then you have to use up to 28 bombs depending on your map mods to then excavate all of the monsters. There are also 4 bosses that you can encounter in Expedition, and that would be Medved, Vorana, Uhtred and Orloroth. All of these have their own unique items that can drop, and every single Expedition monster, including the bosses, have a chance to drop ward gear, which is a type of defense mechanism within Path of Exile 1. And the next one is Sanctum. Now for anyone who's come from Path of Exile 2, this is pretty much the same as the Trial of Sekima. So basically you will enter a Sanctum in which you have to then traverse through a series of rooms and a series of floors. Every single floor gets harder and harder, and there is multiple traps and multiple little mini bosses, and then there is then a boss at the end of every single floor. You can be cursed with afflictions, but you can also gain boons to make it a little bit easier. However, you can also remove the afflictions, but you can also remove the boons. Now the bosses at the end of every single floor are Vardaketh, Brahm and Uzar, Zenithar, and then on the final floor you will fight Lycia, and then at which point she will then transform into a upgraded version of Lycia, Herald of the Scourge, at which point she can then potentially drop an item that is probably one of the most expensive items in the game, which is called a relic, and it's called the Original Scripture. Now the Original Scripture grants you an Original Sin ring if you are able to complete an entire 4-floor Sanctum without being hit once. It's probably one of the most expensive items in the game, but the challenge is very, very difficult. At the beginning of every single Sanctum, you can add relics to try and make the experience a little bit easier and a little bit more fun. These will all drop through the Sanctum as you traverse through. And finally, you have Resolve, and once your Resolve bar is completely depleted, then your Sanctum run is completely over. So it is a rogue-like experience, so try not to get hit. Now for this next section, I'm going to run through 3 different mechanics just because they are very, very short. So I'm going to run through Sentinel, Affliction and Kalandra. So the first one is Sentinel. So Sentinels were a very good element that was added in Sentinel League, and they were basically little drones that would follow you around. You would either have a Stalker, a Pandemonium or an Apex Sentinel. Now they have recently just been added in the Settlers of Kalgur, and you have a chance of potentially finding them at the beginning of your map. You basically will activate them once you click on them, and they will then buff monsters around you. Now there are 3 3 different types. One will activate and obviously empower rare monsters. One will empower every single monster that comes near you until it runs out of monsters that it can actually highlight and buff. It can be ranging up to nearly 100 monsters, and it will last for a limited amount of time. And then the last one, the Pandemonium, that will basically buff every single monster that is near to each other in one radius, and you only get one click of it. So you have to try and stack as many monsters that are all close to each other and then press it, and it will empower every single monster at the same time. Next we have Affliction. Now with Affliction, the League of Affliction was probably one of the most busted mechanics and one of the busted leagues in the entire Path of Exile leagues that I have named. It introduced the Wildwood, in which you would then run through the Wildwood and gain wisps. Those wisps would then empower all of the monsters in the map above it, and that would then increase your drops, whether it be increasing your rarity, your quantity, or your currency. All 3 of which would obviously increase the difficulty of the map, and it would actually make it so that the monsters were a lot harder to kill, but the drops were massively more influenced by these wisps. This has recently been added into the game, so you can sometimes occasionally find the Wildwood at the start of your map and then run around, collect wisps, and they will then influence your map to make it a lot more juicy. Now there was 3 different colours of wisps. There was Vivid Wisps, which would increase your quantity bonus, but it would then mean the monsters would take reduced damage and they would gain increased attack cast and movement speed. There was Wild Wisps, which was purple, and that would grant you a rarity bonus, but again the monsters would then take reduced damage, they would gain additional projectiles, and they would have a bigger area of effect. And then finally there was Primal Wisps, that was blue, and that would cause monsters to drop more currency items, but again that would then mean that the monsters would take reduced damage and gain more crit strike chance and additional crit strike multiplier against you. And finally, in the Lake of Kalandra League, they introduced a series of islands, and we actually got to meet Kalandra herself, who is an owl. She actually introduced us to a mechanic called the Reflective Mist, which we would actually be able to add our entire items in there, so we'd be able to add in any jewelry like rings or amulets, and what she would be able to do is she would mirror that particular item, which would then create positive and negative effects on that ring. Now, as you can imagine, this would potentially break some rings because the negative effects were not possible to run, but sometimes it would make build-defining items. Introduced into Settlers of Kalgur, there is a chance that you may find a Reflective Mist, and what she will do is she will offer you both of the rings or both of the amulets. You can then take both and you can decide what you want to do with them. However, there is a very, very rare drop chance that you may actually be able to drop a Reflective Mist, which is a tradable item. Now, this is very expensive. Now, it's entirely up to you whether you want to take the risk and try and throw in a ring and try and boost it to make it more powerful, or whether you just want to sell it and make a little bit of money on it. Now, I'm not going to be running through the Settlers of Kalgur mechanic because it has not been made permanent into the game yet, and we have no idea whether it is going to be made permanent at all, and the whole town itself is very self-explanatory anyway, so I'm going to leave that until we find out the future of that mechanic. And that is every single mechanic. I managed to do it all in 2 minutes, and I hope that that has helped you. My head is completely boggled. So I hope that enjoyed you guys, and if you did enjoy that video and it was very helpful, by all means throw us a subscribe, throw us some support. I spent nearly 12 hours editing and recording this video. It has been absolutely insane, but it has been one of the most fun and enjoyable videos, and you don't actually realize how much content there is within Path of Exile until you actually start to realize how much there is and how much you need to try and fit in within a 2-minute window. But I managed to do it. So thank you guys. I hope you enjoyed the video and the series. I am going to be continuing tomorrow. Until the next video we're going to be going through Labyrinth and how you ascend, and talking everything in regards to labbing and how to get golden keys and how to get these special alternate gems. Until that video guys, stay sane.